Yeah, I just kind of caked it on top, and we'll come back to what my next question really is. But a lot of these points that you're bringing up are very well defined and very not just kind of guessing. Especially the way you talk about it, and so that leads me to believe that they're backed by data, right? They're backed by analysis, and just also having talked to you before about how you advise your investors on what are smart financial investments and where to locate their financial assets. Talk to us a little bit about that because obviously this is developers as a service, so we talk about the more nerdy side of stuff, and so you can't give us a secret sauce. I appreciate that, but just talking in theory, or I guess in general practice across real estate investing in general, what are you seeing pick up as trends for the use of machine learning and data science?
Yeah, the hardest thing to tell people is that you can't predict the future. So any sort of models that say like I can predict where rent or where prices are going to be in a year, you know, 99% of that is vaporware, right? It
Mm,
exists because people want to believe in the dream, but you really can't predict the future with the past. You can only iterate, slowly forward. I won't give too much secret sauce, but something I built, for example, for one of the large real estate clients that I have, I built them a Zillow rent model, basically. They owned 10,000 single family homes. With that, that's enough data to build a machine learning model. It's very simplistic, just a statistical regression. We did the fancy way to call it is like it's ensemble models, right? So I ran some boosted trees and random forest and then a little more specific, but you can't really go beyond that. Any more than that, you start getting into this problem where you overfit on the data. And so it's great for your training data, but it's terrible for predicting on future unseen data, right?
right.
It's really hard to predict the future. There's some seasonality to it, but we got about half the error that Zillow got on the Zillow rent model.
Wow. Wow. Half just to iterate on that, half the error rate on
Yeah,
on these predictions that then Zillow themselves got on their own data.
correct. Now, here's the difference. Zillow, most of their rental rates are from non-professional landlords, right? They're mom and pops. So if you have, an apartment complex or like a small duplex, for example, in Austin, you could just say, I'm going to charge like $8,000, even though everyone else is paying 2,000, right? You can do that because you're a mom and pop and it doesn't really matter. You're just like, I'm
Yeah.
doing it for fun and this is the only rate that I'll do it out for. And that's going to stay on the market for a while, right? Um, Sometimes they'll undercharge. They'll only charge 1,000 because like I just want somebody in there. I've owned this. I inherited this house from my parents who bought it in the 70s. So any rent is good rent as long as the tenant's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So you have these outliers that kind of mess with the true market rent pricing, right? So you end up having this issue where you're pulling from data from different, MLS feeds, but it's imperfect data. And it's data that isn't just for, a duplex in Austin. You're looking at condos in downtown New York for rent also. And you're looking at a single family home in Milwaukee. And so the bigger and bulkier your model is, the lower the accuracy rate is because it's so general.
Right.
So the problem with the model that I built for them is anytime you go beyond single family homes in the South and the Midwest and like Southeast,
Sure.
if you try to predict rent in California, it just goes bonkers,
It's gonna be
right?
way more. Yeah. Yeah.
Way up. But they'll never buy in California or New York or like downtown metros, right?
Okay.
Uh,
Hey,
Mostly.
but
Mhm.
I was just gonna say along on that same point, you could say the same thing about a property data analyst human, right? I mean, if somebody's lived in Florida their whole life and they only really know about the Florida real estate market, especially in their local area, and you try to ask them to predict about something in Milwaukee or in California, I mean, I feel like, kind of given the same data, they wouldn't, they wouldn't do much better.
Yeah. And so most of the data science parts of it is just common sense. And at the end of the day, a lot of what I'm doing that I went and got this stupid degree to do all this math
Sure.
for is just learning the bare bones of how the model works. But um, at the end of the day, it still comes down to like intuition and, is this a reasonable way to approach getting data, getting results, and
Mm,
can I actually produce something where I can generate money with this? And for
right.
zero rent, you can. So now what can you do with that rent model? You can underwrite a whole city, for example. You can
Mm.
find the best market that you want to. Other things I've done for them is create classification models that say like, all right, is this going to be class A, class B, class C, depending on the different census features? What level of the asset class is it going to be, right? That's a categorization problem.
Right.
And if you're in machine learning space, k-means is probably one of the best models to do if you're trying to self-organize instead of doing everything by hand. Why is it that it works for someone like the hedge fund clients? It's because they own a lot of property. That's the main thing, right?
Yeah. More data.
More data. I'm a small fund. We're running like 200 units. It's like I can't really run much machine learning on that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Do some time series modeling and try to predict seasonality, but I can't do much with it other than just general base principles. And
Yeah.
so if I now have 10,000 homes, all that data is going to be proprietary. And they do the same thing with data that they purchase from other operators, right? So these seats are 100 grand a year just to get data. So then how can you as a small person compete?
Yeah.
It's the same thing as stocks. You
Yeah.
go and you buy small cap, right? You buy 5, 10, 20 units because you're not buying thousands at a time. So
Yeah.
when you do purchase, you can do more research. You can be more careful about your products that you're analyzing because at the end of the day, in order for these funds to grow, they have to keep scaling. And so what they do is they might have some that are duds in the portfolio, but then they want maybe 60, 70% of them to be knock it out of the park projects. And that
Sure.
outweighs the 20 or 30 that they lose. So, there is a cautiousness that you can have more of as a smaller investor.
Hmm.
And you take machine learning principles, you don't even have to do that. Zillow has free data. Fred, the Federal Reserve Economic Data, has free data. Um, there's a lot of ways that you can outperform a larger fund because you're doing everything by yourself, and you're being more cautious about that information. Because the way these funds purchase homes, it's like it just fits a category, boom, shoot for it, buy it, right? Whereas
Yeah.
you as a local investor might say like, hey, that's R1 zone. So one day I can add a back, unit and then I can generate more income with it. And those, hedge funds aren't going to touch that. They're like, that's too much
Yeah.
work. We have all this money. I don't want to
Yeah.
do it. It needs to be renovated. I'm going to buy something that's already finished because that's my superpower. I, as a fund, have billions of dollars at my disposal. So why am I going to waste my time worrying about adding back units and then getting through the
Right.
process of permitting with the city, right? So
Sure.
that's kind of my perspective, at least in
Sure.
terms of how you as a small individual investor might outperform a larger hedge fund.
Right. Yeah. And that's the trend that I see too, is data is just it's already been the new gold. Like everybody says Bitcoin is digital gold, but user data, investment data, property transaction data, all this kind of stuff that can be taught to a machine learning model, to a prediction model,
Yes.
that's true, that's true digital gold. And so I try to tell people that, if they want to do one thing to increase the lifetime value of their product or services, collect data and label it
Yes.
accordingly. That'll definitely help out the most. So one thing I wanted to ask is on state of adoption, right? So in terms of companies, especially the bigger hedge funds, even obviously they've already adopted it because you're doing a lot of this work for them. But, you know, it can still be, I've noticed in the machine learning space, especially, it's like one or two big players are really leading the way with
Yep.
investment and, having grants put together for these different types of programs versus it becomes standardized, like across everybody's kind of part of how they do business
Yep.
is they include machine learning models. So where do you think it's at kind of on the scale in terms of the real estate investment world?
So it's really hard because real estate is a lot harder to systematize than other industries. It's very capital intensive. Believe it or not, it's also people and relationships intensive, right? So every deal has three parts. I like to say in real estate, there's the actual deal itself. Is it a discount? Then there's the money. Like, can you get better financing than other people, or can you raise more money than other people with lower returns and then get yourself an outsized return? And then finally, the third part is experience, right? Your
Mm.
operator. You can't scale up people through operations, and so um, or specifically, you can't scale up relationships quickly. Um,
Yeah.
And what happens is there's a lot of people from the tech side coming in and thinking that they are smarter than the real estate people. They will go all in on the algorithm. What we've seen, at least in the last 2 years, is that all the e-buyers who went in on the algorithm are all
Overshot.
they
Yeah.
they all dump the e-flipping,
Yeah. Ooh,
right?
this is Zillow, Redfin, Open Door.
Yeah, the list goes on, but that's what we've learned is that if you trust too much in the algorithm and not enough on your contractors, your uh, project managers, your agents, you can't really scale those up quickly because those relationships take time to build and also time to test and trust, right? And if you're in tech, you break this, it's like, great, we're going through a spend through a week. We're going to break it 8 or 9 times before we come out with a good product. Real estate, you don't really figure out if someone's bad until like 6 months of hiring and you're like, why is this person underperforming? And hopefully you've got enough scale that you have like 3 other agents working with you. You're like, hey, this leasing agent is performing at half the rate as my other 2 leasing agents, which by the way, you can't really get to that size until you have at least like 90 to
Yeah.
200 units or something like that, right? And so you look at that and you just, you're like, how simple is this math? It's like you really have 3 agents worth of data on a
Mhm.
large building that costs you $100 million. How many of those can you actually purchase? How many data points can you actually collect from that without
Yeah.
having a large amount of money? And so the convergence that I'm seeing is that the people who went from the tech side into real estate are all going out of business
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they thought they could just automate things and do it better than things in the past, which honestly there's a lot of opportunity for growth, but they ignored the base principles and the fundamentals when it comes to real estate, which is
Right.
experience, money, and good
Yeah.
deals, right?
And it almost seems like they overgeneralize their data too a lot, like you were saying with the default Zillow model that was trained on everything is they just kind of they were too generalized about their markets and
Yep,
yeah, that's
they're
and
holding
you hate to see it. Yeah.
hate
You
to
hate
see
to
it, but
see it and you hate to see it with crypto too. It's the same thing. Everybody was like FTX is crypto. All right, let's invest. Like Kevin O'Leary says it's good. Let's do it,
yep,
you know?
yep, yep. So
But at the same time, I guess you could say a silver lining maybe is that it sounds like it introduced the algorithm a lot more than before.
yep,
Like the real estate market beforehand was more so, like you said,
yep.
relationship heavy, but now it's bringing in a tech side too.
Yep. So what I've seen success in, at least for the hedge funds that I've been, doing some work for, they start from an operating business first, and then they layer on some tech with it, right?
Mm,
So, I went into their systems. A lot of them seem to be running on your standard SQL databases still, by the way.
mm,
And it's like,
yeah,
I'm like, this is 8 rows of replicated data. Like if this is a NoSQL thing, you could have saved yourself, 8 rows of data, and then
yeah,
your search functionality would be way easier if you use Elasticsearch. But they're like, yeah, but then we have to hire another engineer to like set it up. And
yeah,
you're like, yeah, of course. But the effort that
it,
you save now
yeah,
is going to bite you in the butt as you pick up
mm,
more properties, right?
yeah,
Uh, so uh, but they're getting more into the tech side, and I'm starting to see a lot of results come out of that, mainly because they're doing things at a scale that their other real estate smaller competitors can't do,
mhm,
and that's kind of where they're going to stand out is taking advantage of machine learning, data science, and specifically their own personal data that other people don't have access to, right? They're able to outcompete because they can bid faster, renovate cheaper, and change the prices on their rent faster so that